So the decision was made to leave Holland. Tell us about how that was. Were you excited? Were you scared? Do you have a sense of what your parents were feeling?
Well, first of all, scared. Fear wasn't part of my nature at the time. It was more of an adventure. It was sheer excitement at trying to learn about your new country. The people at the Canadian Embassy had suggested we go to a place called Edmonton. Well, none of us had heard of Edmonton, and we took their word for it. But I decided to go to my school and check with some teachers in an atlas in the school library. And lo and behold, I found Canada, and I found 3 cities. 2 of them, Toronto and Montreal in the east, were on the map, and Vancouver, away on the west coast, was on the map. And the rivers in Hudson Bay were shown, and the St. Lawrence River were shown. That is absolutely it. So when I reported that at home to my parents and our neighbors across the street, Mr. and Mrs. De Bruin, who also decided to emigrate to Canada. He was also a carpenter like my father. I recall Mrs. De Bruin saying, well, are we going to end up right in the middle of the prairie? Well, that of course didn't turn out to be the case, but there was a fear of, no, that's not the right word, but there was some trepidation about where we were going to end up. We just didn't know.
And what about the preparations to leave?
Well, what had to happen is that all of my parents' belongings had to be sold, except my dad's tools and some pots and pans. Financial arrangements had to be made. The ticket on the boat had to be purchased and paid for. Saying goodbye to all our friends and making those arrangements, my parents had to do. The trip was to start on the 13th of June 1951, and about 2 weeks beforehand there was a party for my parents, or for all of us, I guess. It was a combination wedding anniversary party and a going away party for the relatives and friends. The 12 and a half years is half of 25, and the Dutch look for any excuse to have a party. One of the memories that I have is my father was presented with a beautiful brown leather billfold and a black Waterman fountain pen. I don't know what happened to the fountain pen, but I'm now the proud owner of my dad's billfold. I still have it here to this day. And so here we are 60 years later, and I've still got his leather billfold. So it's quite a memory. We had to find a way to get from Amsterdam to Rotterdam, because Amsterdam was not on the ocean. Rotterdam was the biggest seaport in Europe at the time, and I think it still is in terms of tonnage. So my Uncle Louis, my dad's brother, was a bus driver, and he was able to secure a bus to take the family, friends, to Rotterdam from Amsterdam, about a 40-minute trip. And I remember one of my friends, Everett, I don't remember his last name, came along as well. And there was one stop along the way from the time we left our home. My Uncle Louis had picked everybody else up, and then picked up my parents and Robert and myself and my sister Lucy, who arrived in 1949. Well, we stopped at my school where I had taken grades 1 to 4, because the teacher and this class wanted to present me with a going away gift. And I didn't realize this until I got there, and my mom and dad said, "Oh, go in, they want to say goodbye to you." So there was a card, and they presented me with a beautiful atlas, which I had for many years. It's gotten lost over the years, but the memory isn't lost. The other thing I remember is driving through Amsterdam, not directly out of town to Rotterdam, but down a canal, or a canal street which was filled in over the years, called the Elandsgracht. And there was a sports shop there owned by someone named Herman van Raalte. Now that may not mean much to other people, but it meant a lot to me, because my brother Robert and I used to go to soccer games at the Olympic Stadium every Sunday. It cost us 25 cents, and had a Coca-Cola and patat frites along the way. And he was my hero, and he was the goalkeeper. He was also the goalkeeper for the Dutch national soccer team. So he was quite an eminent athlete. So I wanted to go by and rolled down the window, and as we went by, I don't know if he was standing in front or not, I yelled, "Hey Herman, goodbye!" And so those types of things stay in my memory. When we arrived in Rotterdam, we went directly to the docks where the boat was waiting for us, and this boat, it's the biggest boat I've ever seen. It was the SS Volendam, the steamship Volendam, which used to be a whaling vessel, which had been converted to a passenger ship for the purpose of transporting immigrants across the Atlantic Ocean to their new country, either in North America, United States, or in Canada. And it was a ship that was owned by the Holland American Line, which is still in existence today. Well, we said goodbye to everybody. Photographs were taken, and a few tears were shed, I'm sure. Not by me, but I couldn't wait to get on the boat, and we sailed away from Rotterdam overnight into Le Havre, a port in northwestern France, and picked up a number of other immigrants there from Belgium and France. And we had about 1,200 passengers, immigrants, and a crew almost of the same number, so we were well looked after. The sleeping accommodations on the boat were such that the men and the boys slept 2 stories below the main deck, in a large hall with all the other men in bunk beds, and that's where my father and my brother Robert and I slept. My mother and Lucy slept in a semi-private room or rooms with about 5 or 6 other couples on the main deck at deck level. The trip across the Atlantic took 10 days from June 13th to June 23rd, and what I remember about the trip is my dad had to get rid of his Dutch money before we came to Canada. So he gave Robert and I some very generous allowance every day, and we spent them freely on, you guessed it, patat frites and Coca-Cola, and I guess a few snacks on board as well. At night, Robert and I used to sneak down and watch people dancing, and we watched them play bingo from time to time. Well, none of us had ever heard of bingo before, and we heard these people yell out bingo when they got a row filled, or bingo. So I think the second night Robert and I were there, I guess we looked at each other and we decided we'd yell out bingo too, and we did that a couple of times, and the person who had organized it came up to us and asked us, "Look, you boys, you're going to have to leave unless you stop what you're doing," and of course we stopped. But we continued to watch every day. The downer on the voyage was my father's kidney stone attack. The poor man had one in the army when the Germans invaded Holland, and he had one again in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So the ship's doctor injected him with morphine, and that kept the pain down, but he really couldn't move very much because the stone would become dislodged, so he tried to be immobile as much as possible, which made the landing in Canada somewhat difficult. My mother had to look after me and the boys, and Robert and Lucy. The first sight I had of our great country of Canada was where the St. Lawrence rivers, the south and north shores of the St. Lawrence, slowly come together at sunrise on June the 23rd in the morning. And it was a magnificent sight. It was a beautiful sunrise, and you could see high cliffs on both sides. So it must have been the Gaspé Peninsula on the south, and I don't know, and the Quebec North Shore. And slowly the shores came together, and we were then in the St. Lawrence River, and eventually ended up later that morning in Quebec City, which is where we landed, right below the Plains of Abraham, as I subsequently discovered. The process in going through customs and immigration was not an easy one, for my mother certainly, but with some help from other persons, from Mr. and Mrs. de Bruin, she got us through customs and immigration, and my father, was immobile, and he kind of stayed in the background while my mother got everything arranged. So that was our arrival in Canada.